Hi, I'm Dr. Scott Conkright. What if your body is holding memories your mind can't access? We explore how early relationships shape your nervous system and how healing begins through relationship, not just insight. Tune in now. Your body has something to say. We begin as creatures of reflex. We startle, cry, flail, and feed. Affective lightning bolts shoot through an unshielded sky. The infant is a cat by design, fast to react, fast to flee, quick to claw, quicker still to protect the self from overwhelm. I mean all this metaphorically, of course. There is no time for reflection, only the raw signal. Too loud, too cold, too long alone. These early signals originate not from the mind, but from the body, which is regulated by a rapidly developing yet still maturing endocrine system. The HPA axis is like a fire alarm, still learning to calibrate its responses. It sometimes overreacts to minor stressors and sometimes underreacts as it develops its regulatory precision. Cortisol responses can be highly variable, with some infants showing elevated reactivity, while others demonstrate blunted reactions to the same challenges. Both the sympathetic nervous system and its parasympathetic counterbalance are online and functional at birth, but they're still learning to work together. The coordination between these systems, the delicate dance of activation and recovery, remains immature, creating periods of physiological dysregulations as the infant's stress response systems gradually fine tune their intricate interplay. But then time and care do their slow work. By toddlerhood, the hormonal system begins its long calibration. The hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands start to communicate with more precision. Cortisol responses become rhythmic, no longer screaming at every shadow. The prefrontal cortex grows denser, absorbing feedback and learning the patterns. The cat learns to pause, if only for a moment. Then comes puberty, and with it, everything changes. Puberty doesn't just change your body, it also changes your life. It radically changes the weather system of your inner world. Suddenly, the familiar sensations you once knew, like excitement, fear, curiosity, and disappointment, arrive with new volume, new velocity, and new stakes. The world feels bigger, louder, and more personal, and your skin no longer fits quite the same way. Why? Because deep inside the body, a second central signaling system comes online. While the HPA axis, the stress response system, continues to mature, the hypothalamic-pituitary-gonadal axis awakens, releasing pulses of estrogen, testosterone, and growth hormone. But these aren't just ingredients of sexual maturation. They are the magical ingredients of emotional and cognitive possibility. Now, two systems are talking to each other. The stress response, still learning its rhythms, gets flooded with new chemical messengers, hormones with names that sound like incantations: testosterone, estrogen, oxytocin, vasopressin. These aren't just drivers of desire or anatomy. They inform understanding of what the world feels like and thus influence how the world is interpreted. They crosswire with the existing stress pathways, amplifying everything. They are involved in meaning making and are part of the complex bio-wiring of how we perceive risks, rewards, and relationships. Affect, once raw and reactive, now begins to stretch. The amygdala's alerts still fire, but the prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, the slow, deliberate seat of reflection, is catching up. Pathways strengthen between emotional storms and the systems meant to contain them. Not silence them, but grade them. I don't mean giving them A's, B's, or F's. The ability to rate them on any type of scale becomes possible. The human system now seeks nuance. Affect reactions become more layered. Affects, memory, and thinking start blending together to create some remarkable recipes. What was once considered yucky is now intriguing. Think of cooties. Scary experiences are paired with excitement. Risk taking is highly evaluated in terms of risk reward, and all sorts of new possibilities open up. Sexuality is now a very real thing. It's now yucky and intriguing in all kinds of problematic ways, as are forbidden beliefs, tastes, and preferences. Imagine a child as cat like, impulsive, fast, startling. One sound, one touch, one shift in light, and they're gone. Highly reactive, low regulation. The system reacts to protect itself, not to understand. But as adolescence unfolds, a new style begins to emerge, a dog like one. Still emotional, still loyal to feeling, but now relational. The dog, unlike the cat, looks at the face of the other before acting. It detects tone, posture, and subtle movements. A dog waits, watches, it senses tone, seeks cues. It doesn't just feel, it feels with. This isn't because the dog is more mature, it's because the system has begun to integrate. This is not a metaphor for obedience, it is a metaphor for integration. Hormones now modulate not only desire but connection. Oxytocin and vasopressin begin shaping the emotional contours of attachment. Dopamine pathways start to rewrite the logic of motivation, not just to survive, but to matter, to belong. This is why adolescence is so volatile. You're not just reacting to feelings, you're building a system for managing them. You're testing every social mirror for feedback. A text left unanswered doesn't just mean a delay, it also means a missed opportunity. It means, or can mean, do I still exist? Identity is now affectively tethered to the eyes and voices of others. But something else, something quietly revolutionary, is happening. The birth of what I call affect grading, a term I've coined to describe the adolescent's emerging capacity to experience the subtle variations and intensities that exist within our innate emotional system. According to Sylvan Tompkins' affect theory, we are born with 9 distinct affects that serve as our biological motivation system: interest, excitement; enjoyment, joy; surprise, startle; fear, terror; distress, anguish; anger, rage; shame, humiliation; disgust, and dismell. You notice that most of them are in a range of intensity, like interest, excitement. Interest is on the lower end, excitement is on the higher end. These affects evolved as the system that makes things urgent, tells us what to pay attention to. They are, in Tompkins' words, the spotlights of consciousness. In early childhood, these affects function more like binary switches. We experience them at full intensity with little modulation. A toddler moves from contentment to full distress, anguish, with no intermediate steps, from excitement to rage without gradation. The affect system serves primarily as an immediate motivator, demanding urgent attention and action. However, during adolescence, as the prefrontal cortex develops greater connectivity with limbic regions, something remarkable occurs. The adolescent begins to perceive and experience the continuum that exists within each emotion. Instead of transitioning from calm to full blown anger, the developing teen begins to experience intermediate emotions: irritation, annoyance, and frustration. Instead of drowning in complete shame humiliation, they begin to feel embarrassment, a momentary, localized, and survivable variation of the same affective family. This affect grading represents a fundamental shift in how the adolescent affect system operates. Where before affects served primarily as immediate motivators, they now begin to function as more nuanced information systems. The adolescent can now experience what Tompkins calls the characteristic feeling of an affect without being completely overwhelmed by its intensity. What enables this transformation is the adolescent's growing capacity to form what Tompkins calls scripts, learned patterns that emerge from repeated sequences of stimulus, affect, and responses. Let me be clear about this. Scripts actually start forming from day one. As I mentioned earlier, they start with expectations being met or not. The adolescent script is more language based. They now have access to language and memory. It can start predicting in a more, quote, scientific way. They become more sophisticated because as memory integrates with affect over time, the teenager develops increasingly sophisticated scripts for managing affective experiences. A young child experiencing shame humiliation when their block tower falls simply feels the full punishing intensity of the affect. But an adolescent, drawing on accumulated scenes of similar experiences, begins to develop scripts that allow them to recognize this is the feeling I get when something I'm excited about gets interrupted. But it doesn't mean I should stop trying. The growing adolescent's nervous system is learning to link affect to autobiographical memory, creating what we might call narrative feeling, which is the capacity not only to feel, but to remember feeling and to anticipate it and to organize these affective experiences into coherent stories about the self. This is why adolescence is the beginning of narrative identity. You start to say things like, I felt humiliated and I'll never trust her again. Or, I was proud because I stood up for somebody. Or, I felt invisible, like I wasn't even there. These are more than emotional reports. They are the emergence of self through affective interpretation. In this way, adolescence is not just a crisis of mood, it is the birth of a story, of narration. The capacity to say not only I hurt, but I hurt because I needed to be seen. Not just I'm excited, but this matters to me because it touches who I think I am. However, here's the risk. If the early relational environment was unstable, characterized by intense shame, dismissal, or control, or trauma, the cat like system may persist. Affect may remain ungraded. Emotions may either explode or disappear. The dog never learns to wait. It becomes fearful, over attuned, or disengaged. This is not a failure, it's a defensive adaptation. The shift is fragile, it depends on the surrounding world. Teenagers learn affect grading through interaction, through co-regulation, through the ability to feel something intense and not be punished for it. Being named, not shamed. The ability to pause, reflect, or choose depends on whether the world has been safe enough to try. Adolescents don't develop a narrative because they hit a certain age. They develop it because someone, somewhere, gave them the room to feel deeply, awkwardly, strongly, blindly, and explore the process of it all without being punished for it. And let's not forget culture. Peer dynamics are a hormonal amplifier. One glance, one group text, one laugh can shape an entire emotional memory. Affect is both private and tribal. Adolescence is the laboratory where feelings, stories, and status intersect. So, adolescence then is not just a time of mood swings, it is the beginning of emotional authorship. Not the fully formed narrative self, but the first draft. The first attempt to make sense of what feeling means, not just as experience, but as identity. What emerges from this developmental process, when all goes well, is what we might call affective sophistication, the ability to experience the full range and intensity of human affects while having the script-based capacity to modulate, interpret, and choose responses to them. The adolescent learns that they can recognize the biological and psychological reality of anger and rage without being compelled to act on it immediately, if at all. They discover that shame humiliation, while inherently punishing, can contain information about what matters to them. They develop scripts that allow them to sustain interest excitement even in the face of difficulty. What emerges, if all goes well, is the early narrative self, as I mentioned earlier. Not just reacting, but reflecting, and not just emoting, but integrating. This is the prelude to late adolescence. In late adolescence, we do not simply have feelings. We learn to grade them, integrate them, and use them to narrate the kind of life we wish to live. The years when we're still learning that we have feelings, but we're not our feelings. These are the years when we're still learning that we have feelings, but we're not our feelings. We can grade them and choose them, use them, even rewrite them. And perhaps most importantly, that our feelings, when integrated with memory and meaning, become something new entirely. Affect, once impulsive, becomes a tool for coherence. Emotion, once overwhelming, becomes an invitation to meaning. Memory, once often scattered, becomes intentional. And the endocrine system, once the source of floods, becomes an ally of insight. We are no longer cats darting from shadows or dogs merely sensing the pack. We become something else, a creature of story with agency, a being who can say, this is what I felt, this is what I chose, and this is who I am becoming. We become a story to tell. If something stirred in you today, some memory, some feeling, some new way of seeing yourself, trust that. In the next episodes, we'll dive deeper into how affect becomes identity, how relationships shape our nervous systems, and how healing begins with awareness. So be sure to subscribe and follow along. And if you're curious where you are on your own growth journey, take the free self-discovery snapshot at scottconkright.com. You can also join our newsletter for weekly insights and learn about upcoming therapy groups, meetups, and live workshops. Until next time, be kind to the part of you that felt everything first